Excellent. Hello, everybody. Can you all hear? Have we got everything working?
Everything looks great.
Terrific. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we are working today. And this is the Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past and present, to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded and that Indigenous ways of being, learning and knowing inform every aspect of the kind of work that we're doing today. And I'd like to make that really clear to you. The picture there is of Bondi Beach, which is also part of Bidjigal land. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here today. Thank you so much for your patience and your emergency tech support, which was truly sensational. Just going to show that can-do attitude that gets us through all of these kinds of problems. My topic today is talking to you about community in research, and I've put community there in inverted commas because, of course, there are kind of social science definitions of community that might be different to some of the definitions of community that we use more broadly in research. I'm using community here in the really broad sense to refer to the populations, groups, individuals, people with shared characteristics or shared identities with whom we are aiming to do research, and therefore whom we might want to engage in our research in order to make our practice more effective, more efficient, more ethical and more accountable. And I guess I see the ethical and accountable parts of those aspects of research as being really, really critically important to our project as researchers. And I reckon that you do too. I feel like reading the room here that's what brings people to a session like this. If I were you, I would be sitting here thinking, who is she and why is she speaking to me? And so I thought I'd just throw together this little reflexivity slide to show you who I am. I'm a queer cis woman. I've worked professionally in the HIV community sector for a very long time before I came into academia. And before that, I was in LGBTQ. I don't reckon we were I+ at that stage, publishing. So I've got a long history in working in those particular areas. I'm a former president of Australia's peak HIV community organisation, the one that's now known as Health Equity Matters. It was the Australian Federation of AIDS Organisations when I was there. I'm a bioethicist. Now, I'm a bioethicist because I come from the HIV community sector. So it was in my work there, working with, in and for communities, that made me decide to go back to university, which was the best thing that I ever did. I hope it's going to be the best thing that you ever do as well, for those of you who are HDR students. Hello, welcome, come in. We've only just started. I'm also a mother, so I've got pictures of my family up here. My daughter is the one with the long dark hair, and she's also the person under the flags there in Barcelona. So my daughter's there. My late partner, Marion, is there. My cat, Agatha, is there. My new partner, Teresa, is there. And my sister is there down the bottom. That's my sister, myself, and my daughter, all in our matching pajamas. Because, sometimes we do those kinds of things. So that's where I come from, and I guess these are the people and the relations that inform, support, nurture me as a researcher and a person working in these areas. So it was really interesting for me thinking about what populations and communities have I worked in really intensively. And I put them into slightly different categories. So the first bit up the top are the groups where I've been like the key researcher doing the work and being the researcher who is forging the partnerships and the collaborations. And that's with gay men, with trans and gender diverse people, with people who have innate variations of sex characteristics or intersex people, and with people living with HIV. And so those are the communities that I've worked in most intensively. And I recognise the kind of the irony of the fact that being a queer woman, I've basically never really done any intensive research in queer female communities. It's always been men because of the HIV connection, I guess. I have also been involved closely in projects with who have worked with Aboriginal LGBTQ young people. That was an amazing project, but I personally didn't do the community work. With Aboriginal young people in regional New South Wales, with HIV service providers as well. And finally, with the Cook Islands Family Welfare Association. And I don't think that Kate is here today, but Kate was a PhD student who forged an amazingly strong connection there, which worked. It was the backbone of her PhD research. And she did incredible work, both consulting with people, working really intimately in the community to make sure that the work that she did not only met, the standards and things for a university, higher degree by research, but that it was meeting the needs of those people, that those people were getting back what they needed from it, that the community organisation who invested in her got a real return on that investment, and that everybody left feeling that the research had been a positive thing in their community. I'm talking about that in some length because I learned a lot from the way that Kate worked in that community, and I feel like it was a really inspiring kind of project, I guess. And it included her going back when she'd finished all of her data collection, doing a special report particularly for that community and making sure that they had their ownership and their investment in that research really well acknowledged. And that's something I think that we're going to talk about later today when we're getting into actually workshopping people's projects. So thinking about today, what am I going to do with you? As you know, some of us in the room are going to be workshopping things later on. But one of the things that I want to do is tell you some stories from my perspective about how we got to where we are now in research, how we moved from this idea of data extraction, or this ethos of data extraction, into one where co-design really is valued, like it's even valued by funding bodies. It's a remarkable change and such an important one. And I want to unpick some of the threads. I'm going to talk to you about one of the particular threads, the one that I understand best. I'm just going to plant some seeds about the other ones. There might be people in the room or online who understand better how they came to play into this massive sea change in the way that we understand and conduct research. So here I want to acknowledge the intersecting pathways. The one that I'm going to be talking to you about is community responses to HIV and the importance of that as a disruptor. But nothing happens in isolation. Also, Indigenous and First Peoples research was certainly moving toward co-design ideas, decolonising discourses, and the way that those have been used and developed by First Peoples and in collaboration with ethical First Peoples researchers who are not themselves Indigenous. Participatory action research coming from some of those kind of liberation, some of it's kind of related to liberation theology and coming from the 70s in the way of changing the way that we understand researchers and the researched, and coming to see, I guess, disrupting those traditional boundaries and barriers and working together to actually meet the goals of the researched, and feminist approaches to the social sciences. So they are the 4 threads that I've identified. I'm sure that is not a complete list. If there are people there online who are thinking, but what about, please put it in the chat, because let's add to this. Let's make this an opportunity for us to grow in our understandings of how these social forces, there are so many social forces in the world at the moment that are against, humanitarianism and egalitarianism and working toward, doing our best for ourselves and each other. And so I think this is one of the opportunities for us to counter that.
I'm in disability research, so nothing matters without us, obviously.
Look, I've got that on one of the next slides.
Yes.
Thank you for saying that. You're so right. Actually, not the next one, but it's coming up.
Yeah.
I just need to get rid of.
that it's going to happen.
I've got a little thing on my computer which kind of cuts off what I can see here. Oh, I think I can do it. Oh, look, I'm operating my own machinery. So cool. So these are the kind of values that I think that are underpinning research and that are underpinning this turn toward co-design and community, the centrality of communities in research. Reducing power asymmetries between the researcher and the researched, so it no longer being an idea of, the person with power goes in there to kind of take information from those who don't have it. Recognising and valuing lived experience, expertise, and that is still an evolving thing. One of the things I do in the university is I sit on one of the low risk ethics panels, and we still see, we now see a lot of recognition of the fact that when people give their expertise to you as a researcher, that it's actually work and they should get paid for it. But we do still see people who have things like higher degrees that are valued in academia, such as doctors, getting paid at much higher levels than community members. And still sometimes we see with ethics committees them coming back and saying, please justify this. And the document that they use to justify the amounts that people get paid, and I feel bad about this because I keep thinking I should write this paper, is one that links what you should be paying a community member to the minimum wage. It's like, that is not recognising expertise. That is what, young children do for multinational fast food companies. That is not, to me, a respectful way of actually acknowledging what people do. But I feel like the fact that we are valuing that is important. Yeah. Did you want to say something, Sarah?
Oh yeah, I was just like, are you in the working group that's working with the like DVCs about recognizing lived experience and creating a framework for that?
I'm not. I've had
I am, Bridget.
Well, excellent. Fantastic. Okay, so this is something that we need to work, and getting people paid decent sums of money. Fantastic. Decolonising is, of course, a really, really important value that we have in this research. So trying to undermine and no longer surf on the power structures that colonisation has set up. Prioritising the interests of those being researched, which really, when it comes down to it, should mean that we are responsive to the issues that are being raised by the communities or populations, rather than setting our own agendas and thinking, this is something that will get me, published in a high impact journal. Instead, maybe thinking this is something that is really going to get an outcome that might change something in a policy sense for the people that I'm working with. Epistemic justice, conducting research as a collaborative process with shared goals regarding processes and outcomes. And I think all of those things matter. I think process matters as well as outcomes. And that those things all have to be honoured in the way that we think about our values in research. I wanted to share this from, and I've never said this name out loud, so please forgive me, Orlando False Border, Colombian, who is one of the key figures in participatory action research. And I love this quote. And I actually found this, Googling participatory action research. So it's not a result of deep scholarship here, but do not monopolise your knowledge nor impose arrogantly your techniques, but respect and combine your skills with the knowledge of the researched or grassroots communities, taking them as full partners and co-researchers. Do not trust elitist versions of history and science, which respond to dominant interests, so that's the decolonial aspect, but be receptive to counter-narratives and try to recapture them. Do not depend solely on your culture to interpret facts, but recover local values, traits, beliefs and arts for action by and with the research organisations. Do not impose your own ponderous scientific style for communicating results. Isn't that a lesson we can all learn? Wouldn't it be great if everybody got up to a podium and said, do not impose your ponderous scientific style. But diffuse and share what you've learned together with people in a manner that is wholly understandable, even literary and pleasant. For science should not be necessarily a mystery nor a monopoly of experts and intellectuals. So what a man, isn't that beautiful? What a thing to be aiming for and living up to. And it's amazing sometimes what you find when you just start. I think I was procrastinating, thinking I don't want to do my slides, and found that quote, and wow. And Sierra, nothing about us without us. And again, in one of my deep dives into Google, Wikipedia, and all of those excellent scholarly resources, I found that the first mention of this is apparently in early 16th century Poland as part of democratic movements there. And then it got adopted by disability rights movements in the 90s. And so it's disability rights that we know it from, but they must have actually acknowledged its earlier sort of iteration or something, because that history seems to be known. It's widely used by many nations now. It's widely taken on by different community groups. In fact, prior to this, if someone had asked me where it came from, I actually would have thought that it was sex worker organisations, because that's where I've heard it used very, very powerfully and persuasively. Yeah, disability is where it comes from in its more current historical form. And I mean, what can you say about that? It does speak for itself, and it tells us as researchers where our priorities need to be. I wanted to share this slide with you because this image, this slogan, it comes from the 80s, it comes from ACT UP, silence equals death. I think it's a most beautiful form of kind of activist poetry, because not only do the dead not speak, but the idea that in not speaking, that is going to bring about death. There are also those notions of social death. And this was, so silence equals death was a slogan that was coined by ACT UP really, really early on. And I think that they were advertising people who did it. I did read the stories of this a while ago. They inverted Hitler's pink triangle. So, and, so they actively took on that symbol of the pink triangle from, fascist Germany, and fiddled around with it and decided it looked better this way. And you can imagine a whole group of people going, no, can we get it like this, can we look like that? And so this was a slogan that took well, they were then AIDS activists, out onto the streets, and it was, it was used in many, many ways to get a voice, to get the body's lived experiences and understandings of people with AIDS or people who were likely affected by HIV into the boardrooms, into the research discourse, into making change around the ways that it was thought about. I don't know whether you're all too young to remember this, but when AIDS, so I'm using the word AIDS here specifically because it was prior to HIV being having been isolated as a virus. When it was first spoken about by the Reagan administration, there was this idea that there would be a vaccine in 2 years. And also, not only do we now know that actually it didn't happen, but the idea with that was then it would be fixed. With the idea that the only problem was infection, that absolutely no recognition of the human worth of people living with HIV. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're then living with AIDS, but I'm going to use HIV because that's modern language. So clunky saying AIDS. And so this idea that people who had been diagnosed with this thing were human, were deserving of human rights, and were alive and needed to be provided with treatment and care was so huge. And the work that ACT UP and its various chapters did was incredible there. I want to share this with you because this is such a beautiful little manifesto, and it's bigger than this. So when you're procrastinating, I don't know about you, I spent a lot of my PhD procrastinating, finding little sideways to, and I think that's positive procrastination, because that's live on your topic, you end up getting this kind of this richness around. So the Denver Principles from 1983. So 1983, there was nothing. There were no treatments that directly addressed HIV at all. There was supportive care, but whether or not you got supportive care often depended on where you were, who you were, how rich you were, how loud you were, how, what your social status was. It was incredibly unfair. But the first one, to as full and satisfying sexual and emotional lives as anyone else. So actually asserting sexuality as a human right is beautiful. To quality medical treatment and quality social service provision without discrimination of any form, and so it goes through that. I love this one. To full explanations of all medical procedures and risks, to choose or refuse treatment modalities, to refuse to participate in research without jeopardising treatment, and to make informed decisions about their lives. But the idea that you actually have to petition for, full explanation of the treatment that you're getting or not getting is remarkable.
I feel like that's still a problem.
I think it is still a problem. Yeah. And it's, again, so it's documents like this can help us see how things have maybe not always changed as much as they should have. To privacy, confidentiality, medical records, human respect, and choose who their significant others are. And so that was about the erasure of people who were in partnerships with, men who were in partnerships with men specifically. And to die and live in dignity. There's another part of the Denver Principles that actually goes on to say we're only sometimes patients. We're only patients when we're receiving care, but we are people, and we're people, living with HIV. And I find it incredibly moving, because actually at that time, people's life expectancies were so poor, and they didn't know at this stage that by 1996 things would change. And of course, that was too late for so many people. But this idea of actually writing rights and forming social movements around those rights, around your rights as a person living with a particular condition, to collectivise, to organise, and then to strategically go forth into the discourses of medicine and research to make your claims for what's right, I think is very beautiful and very inspiring. So I'm talking here about HIV and the acute criticism of the conduct of biomedical research. Some of the things that people with HIV through the various chapters of ACT UP and of course with their allies did was they changed the way that, that medical research was conducted. In particular, the way that large-scale trials were done. So large-scale trials tended to be done over quite a number of years with relatively, small populations. And one of the things that people living with HIV and ACT UP chapters did was they changed this into the notion of getting, say, if you need your 100-person years, spreading it out, so getting many, many more people in to do enormous but much, much faster trials to try to get the evidence that you need faster. So that emphasis on the people needed answers fast. Another thing that they did was getting surrogate markers recognised in trials, that being they were against what they used to call body bag trials, which meant that to get a result, someone needed to get an AIDS-defining illness or die. That kind of research that lights your fires? Absolutely not. So the minute that it was possible, getting surrogate markers like viral load, like markers of your immune system and immune system decline, and getting those written into the way that trials were done. Tony Fauci, who got famous during COVID, was a big part of this, often as a target. So he was often someone who had to be persuaded and who had to be advocated against, but he also speaks very, very warmly about how that changed him and how sometimes he felt like what activists wanted were not in the best interests of the science that was needed to actually prove the extent to which treatments to which treatments worked. But that was very much hammered out, and in that kind of a state of some kind of equality, despite the high level scientific expertise and the lower level from the activists, although a lot of them were very clever people, getting to an answer there. Not just very clever people, also very, very politically engaged people. So when we talk about HIV and the movement around people living with AIDS, it would be wrong not to acknowledge that it came out of the gay liberation movement. So you had people who were already politically active, strategic, and focused on using collective power to make change. And on this next slide, I want to talk about the other side here, which is the amazing work that was done, particularly by the South African Treatment Action Campaign. And again, there's this real parallel here. Here are the people who were highly active politically, strategically, who were intellectually engaged with this idea of how you work against inappropriate power structures. So in the struggle against apartheid. So in some ways, it seems to me to be no accident that the amazing changes that happened around access to treatment and care coming out of South Africa, not just, I would argue, because of the rates of HIV there, but also because of the strategic intelligence in that community that came from the political work that they had been doing, for decades. And I'm not going to, because that kind of gets a little bit more into treatment than actually research, although there's a research element in major changes to treatment. I guess that is Nelson Mandela in that picture, and that's Zaki Ahmed, who was the leader of the Treatment Action Campaign, a truly extraordinary man who achieved amazing things. They took, post-Mandela, they took the South African government to court over the right to treatment for pregnant women, and they won, which is the best advertisement for actually having human rights written into your constitution that I can think of. I want to talk to you about another huge watershed in the way that we think about community and in HIV work, which is the failed PrEP trials. I'm only going to talk to you about one of these trials. Now, for people who don't know what PrEP is basically the use of antiretroviral drugs in people who don't have HIV to stop you from getting it. So it's like a contraceptive pill against HIV. It's a couple of drugs together. I'm not going to go into that. And it works. We know that now. We did not know that in 2004. In 2004, when they were planning trials, scientists were really excited about this. They thought there's a really good chance that using these drugs could actually prevent people from getting HIV. One of the communities they thought it was going to be fantastic to do these trials in was in a group of Cambodian sex workers. The kind of social history of Cambodian sex workers in particular was that they had been in the middle of changes in US administrations, so that sometimes you were allowed to be a collective that said sex work, sometimes you were allowed to talk about reproductive rights, and another administration would come in and you couldn't, and you would lose things would go away. Not a lot of trust in institutions. Many of the women who were targeted as being potential participants in this study were women who were supporting whole extended families by their work. And so their work was really, really critical to their social order.
Is this in Cambodia?
This is in Cambodia. And the idea was that, yeah, fantastic. And this might stop some of these women from getting HIV. Won't that be fantastic? What didn't happen was really careful, granular work with those women to talk to them about what would happen to them on the trials. There was discussion that these drugs are already widely used in treatment. So they had a bit of an idea about what side effects were like not that serious. Things like a bit of really bad diarrhea, the odd person gets some kidney damage. People who were thinking, okay, how do I work with really bad diarrhea? What does a little bit of kidney damage maybe look like in some people? How do you know? Very, very real reasons for worrying about this. And then they were female sex workers, the women kind of started to collectively get active, and they said, well, can we read the protocol? The UNSW researchers who were involved in that said, oh yeah, sure. And then the funder said no. I can't remember why. There's some reason that yeah. I don't know, but so the women weren't allowed to read the protocol, and then this thing came up. Well, what if we get HIV while we're on the trial? If we get HIV on the trial, what's going to happen to us? And the funders were just like, well, whatever's happening in your country. Has your country got access to? This was a really, really big catalyst for the way that other prevention trials were run. So in 2004, the Prime Minister of Cambodia actually came out and spoke and said, this trial's not going ahead here. This is not a trial that is good for us. As somebody who was working in HIV prevention at that time, I remember hearing this and thinking, oh, why didn't they want it? Having not heard that narrative that I just told you, thinking, oh my God, this is such a promising intervention. Why didn't they want it? And I was at an HIV conference, and this is the reason why students and early career researchers, you should go to conferences. A representative of one of the sex worker organisations got up and started to tell the story about, the lives of the women and their thinking through of this, and the incredible injustices of particularly the idea that some people would get HIV in that trial and they were not going to have access to the life-saving therapies that we know exist, that we know people can live on, that people will live normal lifespans on. But the trial sponsors are going, yeah, that's not our problem. Since then, all of those discourses have changed. We now recognise, yes, that is our problem. If we are doing research that depends on somebody potentially getting a lifelong infection, that is our problem. We can't do that research without because we would be using that person. We have to set up the conditions whereby they can access life-saving treatment if that happens. It has to be a good for everybody on the trial, not just the people for whom something works, but all of those systems have to be in place. So this failure, and it was a terrible failure, in some ways set the scene for really, really important things that happened. And really specifically, what that trial, and there was a series of other trials that were similarly set up and with similar issues going on. That happened. For the Good Participatory Practice Guidelines. And these were done by UNAIDS and AVAC, which stands for the AIDS Vaccine Advocacy Coalition, but works really broadly in prevention generally. This is a fantastic document, regardless, if you're doing any kind of biomedical research, I think it's really, really useful. It can also be useful for people who are doing social research, just to see the granular way that they think about good participatory practice. It is built on the kind of scandals of those trials, but I think it takes a very, very positive way to build forward and to say, these are the ways that we make sure that we don't repeat the problems of the past, and that we work with communities productively, proactively, to make change together. And so now I wanted to talk a little bit about epistemic justice and injustice. So epistemic justice meaning, sort of in its simplest form, marginalising of voices, inappropriate control of how knowledge is constructed and created, and who is led into that creation of knowledge and that construction of where we go with knowledge, and particularly the knowledge that comes from research. And just having sort of floated that as a concept, I think as you sitting here, you're probably thinking, what do I do in terms of community work? And I wanted to share with you a couple of stories from the bad old days. So I've told you that I was a community representative. I worked quite often with people at this university, often as a single representative on a kind of governance group that would be made up entirely of scientists. Many researchers did think that the role of having, the community there was so at some point they could turn to me and say, so do you think you can recruit us some people for this? We really want some people here. I, of course, full of my, actor idealism, was there thinking, right, what I want to get into is, who's included, who's excluded, how do I change this, how do I... And one of the ways that I was frequently communicated with that was through, you would have to read protocol documents. This was all biomedical research, and I last did science in, when I was 14. I'm not a scientist, I work in a scientific area, interesting. But I once asked one of the people who did the minutes, would it be possible for you to expand out some of those acronyms? Because it makes it really hard for me to read this. And she just looked at me and said, everybody would think I'd gone mad if I did that. So that was a nice person, like a nice person who seriously thought, what on earth are you asking me to do? Why would I change my language so that a community representative who sits here for hours and, is presumably using some kind of taxpayer money to be here to understand actually what's being spoken about? I worked harder I used to have these piles and piles of annotated documents so that I could understand what was being talked about. But, it was really, really problematic. And the fact that you were there by yourself and you had nobody to speak to, we have changed that. I think none of us anymore would just think that we can just pop a community person into, say, a group of sociologists sitting there talking about theory and go, oh, you got any friends you could get into the study? It's not how we do research anymore. We talk about convening advisory groups or reference groups, having a group of community representatives. I think it's really important that community representatives have standing in their community. And by standing, I mean that they are part of some kind of wider group, not just so you can think that they are some kind of key informants, but so that they're part of some kind of organisational structure. I mean, this is ideal. Maybe sometimes you can't do this. They're part of some kind of organisational structure where they have feed-in from other people and where they know that their views are not the sole view in the world. Having worked in the community sector for such a long time, I've gone through times where there are, fierce battles about what should be done. There was actually a point when Victoria and New South Wales, in terms of people with HIV, completely disagreed about whether you should be tested for HIV. One state had one policy, the other state had another policy. This was prior to there being any effective treatments. That's how big community, discontents can be. Having people who are part of those discourses at least means that they have some kind of access to the complexity and diversity of views, and you hope are going to be less likely to just think, yeah, well, I think this, so therefore that's what everybody like me thinks. Yeah. And I guess that does give you the opportunity to think of them as being key informants in some way, not just individuals who are speaking for themselves, but people who are rooted in their communities, who have some kind of, responsive interaction, responsibility. So, for example, when I was that sole community member, which is a bad thing, I did have people that I had to report to, and I had to tell them what had gone on. I had to tell them what I had said. I had to give them And particularly in my case, because I was often representing people living with HIV, I'm actually not a person living with HIV. So that made that, in some ways, that made it clearer that I had a role that I played. And I think that can sometimes get confusing for people if you think that you are there just as yourself. So it's good to have people who are aware of that. And being really clear about expectations, goals, roles, and responsibilities. And I think that's something that you do at the start, but it's something that you have to do iteratively. And if things change, you have to find ways of documenting, of articulating, and being sure that people understand that, because ideally any kind of exchange or consultation process that you have in your research is not a one-off. It's something that is going to go on, so that you go right through from your planning stages through to what happens at the end when you actually have a result. How do you give back to your communities? How do they hold you accountable for what it is that you and your team have done? So I've said don't handpick, and then I thought, yeah, well, sometimes maybe you have to handpick, but if you have an option around handpicking or going to an organisation and saying, I want to do this, I'd love you to be a part of it, who do you think would be good? I think the latter is better, because I think it's better for your relationship with the organisation, for them to see that you are respecting the flow of information and of responsibility in their organisation, that you're not just saying to the person that you catch the bus with or something, you know, I like you, it would be nice to, be great to have you in the thing. I mean, fingers crossed you get people that you like and can work with. So yeah, I would argue that actually working through the leadership of community groups is worthwhile because it's respectful. Interestingly, if you were working in a foreign country, that is always what would be recommended. And it often surprises me to see what we know to be the way that you would work in a foreign country being undermined in the way that people work in Australia sometimes, by people not working through the structure of organisations. Oh, I'm sorry, there's a space missing there. Consider expression of interest processes. If you can't work through a group, and if you're doing something like trying to get a group through social media or something, I think probably you're all aware that doing things through social media is becoming increasingly fraught. But definitely if you were doing it like that, then having expression of interest and having screening processes would be important. Making it clear what you're going to give back, how you're going to present to the community groups that you've worked with. We've talked about paying people. There are some instances where it mightn't be appropriate to pay people, but you should probably always go forward with an idea that you can pay people, because, for example, a poor organisation or an underfunded organisation might say, can you pay the organisation for the use of that person? And that might be a perfectly, relevant and good thing to do. And I believe that some organisations do that now when, depending on how funding is going, that can be a good thing to do. I think going in with having your draft terms of reference is really good to show when you have your first meeting that you've thought about things, that you've considered how this is going to do, that you're trying to, but not this is the terms of reference that we are going to work to. It's like, this is how I've thought about it. Now let's talk about it. Let's negotiate. How does this work for you? Ways that things should possibly change. Are there, should people be able to swap in and out of the group? Actually working with your advisory group so that, and with your terms of reference to make the changes that are going to make it work for everybody. This is possibly something that will come up for many of you. What if you're a member of the community that you're researching? And I think we all know that our own subjectivities are limited, and that, I think I said, I'm a queer woman. I'm so many other things than that. I can't think that means that I have insight into how queer women think about things. It's like, I know how this one does. And so sometimes actually being a member of a community can make you be a little bit blinkered about if you let yourself be, having a group around you to test ideas and to see, you know, the extent to which your take on things is different too, and how it can be, you know, amplified by other people, and being challenged. I mean, what is really exciting is being challenged in your perspectives, learning from people that who are advising you in your research. Yeah, and I think that ensuring that you do engage, and I know that this is something that's coming up for you, Catherine. It's in fact it's coming up a lot in Catherine's project that we'll talk about, that, which is about queer parenting, and many of us are queer parents, but even with 3 queer parents in the team, it still doesn't mean that we understand the experience of queer parents, because there are so many different ways of doing that and being that, and we need to not just you know, admire ourselves in our little worlds, but make our worlds bigger, so that our research world is going to be one that is able to be responsive to and useful for a broader set of people. Timing and scope. So in an ideal partnership model, and this is, you know, this is the perfect world, collaborations start before research questions are there. And the ownership of the research sits with the community as much as with the researcher, with the community setting the agenda. And I say in an ideal world, it's pretty mandatory if you're doing Aboriginal research that is the case. I would argue, if that is at all possible. If it's not possible, community collaborators do need to be engaged early, and they need to be able to have meaningful input. It needs to not be that people are rubber stamping stuff that you already want to do. They have to have some power to say yes or no. And I guess that's one of the ways that when I talked about the example of the Cambodian sex workers, some people talk about that as a failure, and I guess I did couch it in those terms. But in terms of community processes, I see that as being something of a success, because the community said, actually, no. Yeah, you say this is going to be good for us. We say this is not good for us. And that's powerful and important. But you don't want that to happen to your research. What you want is if the community, if you've got your beautiful research question and everybody sits back and goes, what about this? You need to be open to the what about this, because if your research is going to depend on communities participating and feeling like it's important for them, listening to the nuance of what they say matters could be the difference between not just being able to recruit and everything, but being able to change your little world in the way that you want to do it through your research by making sure that you're relevant.
Well, the Cambodians might have accepted the trial if they could have read the protocol and gotten the things that they were trying to negotiate.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that at one stage they were asking for 30 years of guaranteed health insurance, which was a great claim.
Yeah.
Like that was yeah. And had people come in and said,
yeah, that's
right. Yeah, I think we can organise that, because they probably could have organised it. Yeah, but there was just this kind of no going on in response. Thinking about what's going to happen if disagreement arises. So both between the researcher and the group, but also if there's disagreement in the group. And these are the sorts of things to talk about in early meetings, because ideally you talk about it before it happens, so that everyone can feel a kind of level of ownership and know and recognise. Because if you get to some kind of impasse on something, it's much better if there are, you know, 5 people around the table going, aha, this is where we, you know, phone a friend, or so, you know, call in a policy expert, or whatever it is. Yeah, have that contingency in there, because there might be, particularly if you're working in areas where people have, you know, very, very strong passions, because, you know, you want to make sure that everybody's treated with respect, and it's easier to do that if you've anticipated the possibility of disagreement. And talk about authorship up front. Personally, I think it's a really good idea for community participants to be able to be authors. But people might have different reasons for different approaches, but make it clear. And also, it might be appropriate for some, might be desirable for some people and not others. So if you've got someone who's on your group who's just done their honours degree, that person somewhere down the line might be thinking they want to apply for a PhD. Thinking about how you can get your research and the participation in your research at a governance kind of level to work for your community members is really important.
Would you need to pay them if you're already paying them for meetings and then they want to do authorship stuff that's going to involve more time? Do you need to be able to pay them for that time?
That's a really good question. I would say that that's probably something that you could negotiate, that you could talk about. In my experience, that usually hasn't happened, that people have been paid. But in that case, some of the people who wanted to be authors were people who were already employed in other things. So they weren't people who were unwaged. Yeah. But it's a great question. And that whole economics of things really, really matters. I think it was only about last year, actually, that the Kirby held where I partially work, held a big, kind of confab with a whole lot of community people, many of whom were paid by organisations, but a couple of whom weren't, and they hadn't sorted that out. And somebody actually whispered, sort of whispered, I'm not getting, and it was fixed up post. But having that awareness really, really acutely of who is and who is not waged, and waged specifically for the work that you're doing, and how do we make that fair?
You don't want to make them ask.
Absolutely, you don't. You want to be coming to them and working out what's fair. And in a current project that I'm doing with trans and gender diverse people, we have payment for our advisory group. Most people don't take it because most people are working, but it's the offer goes there, and then people come back and say, yes, that's appropriate for me, and that's just done. That's just sorted out. We don't say, yes, we can pay you, we can't pay you, we can pay you. We ask that people just tell us, and that works.
Just thinking, how much do they contribute when you draft like manuscript or in the authorship? Because most of the time, those in the academics take the lead of drafting, writing all those authorship. And like you said, those who have position, they are being paid or they are actively working in certain activities. So mostly they are less engaged in many of authoring things. So do we think that whenever we submit for publication, they have to meet certain authorship criteria?
I think that they need to have made a substantial enough contribution. But usually in terms of if they have been on your committee and so they've conceptually contributed there, and they've read the paper, and you've kind of got evidence that they've read the paper and usually made some kind of contribution. Sometimes I know that they might have crossed out a button, turned it into a however, but which is not the highest level of intellectual contribution. But I guess, again, you kind of talk about that. In terms of authorship, it is usually only people who have some particular reason for wanting to be acknowledged as authors. So people who have some kind of academic ambition of one kind or another want it. And you usually recognise that they need to, at the very least, closely read the paper and check that everything is right. And then they get stuck into, low-level authors, papers that have 1,000 authors on them, and the ones that count are 1, 2, and the final one.
Bridget, I just wanted to let you know that we're at 11 o'clock.
Oh, thank you, Annie. And I've nearly finished this, so I will just, managing disagreements. We've talked about this, building trust, considering different communication styles, which includes disabilities, the neurodiverse, not using language that is alienating, technical, biomedical. Oh, so it just finishes. I see.
No.
No?
Shouldn't.
No,
Somebody's.
it just decided to close.
We were basically at the end. I mean, I had a pretty picture and stuff.
You mean to try to reopen?
Yeah, we'll just see if Catherine can reopen it because it's her computer usually, just so
Well,
I can
we wanna-
show you the pretty picture. I've got a
We
beautiful
want to see
picture.
the picture. Yeah.
Oh, so it just shut down.
Yeah.
Maybe the battery
I
died.
think that it didn't, that it's out of not charging. It looks like it's charging. Oh. Might be that it's,
That's the
Oh, no.
it was not, it wasn't.
It wasn't charging after all the
That
things.
it's charging, yeah.
We're nearly there. That pretty picture is just seconds away.
Well, is it just asking for questions? Because people might have to be able to put their questions in the chat now.
Yeah, that's a great idea. People could start putting questions in the chat.
Maybe, or comment.
You get my phone to restart if the battery died.
Oh, okay. Do you want to do that? Then I'll get it.
Yeah, so what we did kind of in the other session, there was just kind of maybe 5-10 minutes for questions from the whole room, and then that kind of closed off the online session. Then we went away, and then there was the kind of more workshopy discussion with folks in the room.
Yeah. Sorry.
That's all right.
No, but we're not in the meeting anymore.
I just thought, I had a thought. Is it okay to ask a question?
Yeah, please do.
Oh, no, sorry. This person online wants to ask. a
Yeah,
question.
I think
Who
Anne's got a
announced?
question online.
Sure, ask away, Anne.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I heard this one. Okay. Hi. Yeah, I'm sorry. Just I don't want to get stuck on payments, but I think this is just something I was curious about. So I'm a PhD student, and I was lucky enough to get some funding to hire lived experience researchers, and going out to meet them, it's like, you will be hired for this. You will and they're like saying, oh no, doing it, I'm happy to do it for free and stuff. And it's just like, no, we want to make sure that, you are compensated for your time, you are valued and things like that. But I think my question is, are there ways other than monetary means to compensate people? And I don't ask that, part of me is asking that because I kind of don't like valuing things just through money, if that makes sense. So yeah, I just wondered if there.
Yeah, and there can be, and we have a paper that's coming out in Research Ethics soon that talks about this and talks about it particularly with children and young people and how to different ways of valuing their contributions. So that paper certainly talks about some kind of payment as being, as in paying some sort of what's the word, sort of reimbursement for time as being important, but also other ways of valuing what people do. So, and that can be, through kind of career opportunities, through references, through even stuff like certificates. Some people love certificates. And so there are definitely other things as well. And so that's worth thinking about that. But I guess the bottom line is it tends to only be relatively rich people who are okay about no money. Or people who are comfortable.
Yeah, the people who are they're like refugee background, and they just
Right.
they do a lot in their community for free.
Yeah.
They're in regional Australia, and part of me is that a lot of the reliance is on the goodness of other people, the free goodness. So in the like health and humanitarian kind of sector.
And I wonder if that was a really big theme in there, if you could do something like do a donation to something like, you know, the Asylum Seekers Resource Centre, or do some kind of ceremonial thing in the name of the people who had helped. Do you know what I mean? If people seriously are saying, I don't want to be paid, if there is something else that you could do that that really recognise that contribution in a way that they would see as being socially valued and valuable for their communities.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so far, I guess, yeah, they've been hired through UNSW as casual workers, and like I'm helping them. Like, this is just my own thing. Like, I figured I'm also hiring people from the community. So it's kind of, I guess, this is my way of giving out to the community as well. They get references. I'm going to help them try and find opportunities beyond this. Like, this is just, you know, just being me. But I guess what I found was that money keeps coming out of my mouth. No, you will be paid. You will be paid. And I can help you with the other stuff, but like you will be paid. So I just wondered if. Yeah.
I see what you're saying.
Can I just jump in as well? I feel like Anne, that's also a problem of the UNSW HR system. Like years ago, we used to be able to give people, you know, visa gift card, you know, and although that was a different system, they weren't having to kind of go through the HR space of, you know, being employed, which kind of is a whole different element. And so, like, I for example, one of my colleagues works with folks at the injecting centre, and so a lot of those people, he actually donates directly to the injecting centre, and then they basically pay, you know, folks that are on their advisory group there. So it's kind of not him having a direct monetary relationship with the participants, but it's with the centre that, you know, he's organising with, that then pays further.
Okay. Yeah. So there are ways. One of the easiest ways, though, is paying for their time. But yeah, you can be creative, depending on what they want as well.
Depending on your relationship with the organisation as well. Like, and there was a Clue popped a comment in the chat as well, and like Bridget was saying, like a lot of folks will ask then if they're part of an organisation, for example, another refugee advocacy organisation, for you to then donate to that organisation. I've done that a million times when I was the vice president of Trans Pride Australia. I asked people to just donate to the organisation, and then I just gave my time for free.
Okay,
yeah.
no, thank you.
I've done that with participants too, and
yeah.
And Clue's putting a thing about how work with ethics, and our thing was that we had those cards, and there was some way that you could use the card to actually pay online donation things, and then you got sent a receipt, and you could send the receipt to the person. So that worked quite well. Again.
Okay.
So sometimes it's finding these little ways around. And I like the idea that, you know, also money is not enough.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, that you want to be setting up these other things that are you know, building community in a real way. So yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you
Thanks.
for your answers.
Has anybody else got any other questions online, first of all, because then we can go into.
So I think most folks online look like they've kind of just dropped off, and a couple of folks have had to go to other meetings. But yeah, I think there was just kind of thank yous in the chat, and then Clue's comment as well about what to deal with somebody that's asked for reimbursement for to charity, which I think we've covered.
Yeah, well, thank you, and thank you, Andy, for your time and your patience with the technical difficulties.
No, and can I just say thank you to you, Bridget, because I found this a really uplifting presentation. In the kind of the face of such horrible times in the US and many other places around the globe, just going back to that ACT UP work and thinking about that community work, thinking about what's happening in South Africa, I felt like it was really what I needed at this moment. So thank you so much.
Oh, good, thank you. So thank you for being with us, and we will close out of here. And
I'll close the recording as well from here, so we've got it. Got it done. That's all.
I'm a mid-career researcher and a filmmaker, so probably you shouldn't consider for me a master. But I think the reason I've been invited to this session was mainly because of the practice and the way that I have been using arts and activism and applying various methods to take the message across. I'm always conscious about where should I look at. My camera is on. I guess there's no point of looking at there, isn't it? So yeah, I'll look at you all, and the camera is here. So, so yeah, so I'm here to learn from you as well. We're going to learn together because we all are researchers. We all have substantial level of experience of what we are doing. We are good at what we are doing. That's why we all are here. And let me just, how can I? Okay,
I'll just change the camera slowly.
okay, yeah. I can keep doing while you're.
You just.
Okay. So today's agenda for us is that we're going to first discuss about some methodological stuff and unpack certain decolonial research methods. And then we will be looking at the examples some of you might have read or watched. So I have put 4 examples there. And then we're going to go offline and then workshop the 2 projects we have. Actually, I have added 1 more because it is only 2 we had. Previously, we had 3, so I added my own project. It's in a very, very early stage, but I thought, it'd be interesting to have that discussion. So now it is always good to start with a definition. And I just grabbed this definition from Battisti et al. And decolonizing research means centering concerns and worldviews of non-Western individuals and respectfully knowing and understanding theory and research from previously othered perspectives. So without trying to deconstruct too much, we'll try to understand the essence of decolonizing research by looking at some of the concepts. So I listed some of them, and it's not an exhaustive list. So firstly, transform our colonized views and holding alternative knowledge. It's about alternative knowledge and also recognizing the epistemological diversity, that there is no one way of holding knowledge, and redistributing powers to the non-Eurocentric wisdom. It's very interesting, the word wisdom, isn't it? So it's not only about scholarship. And creates new paradigms jointly with Indigenous people as well as the Western scholars in Indigenous knowledge and Western knowledge. And then seeks social emancipation and solidarity with the oppressed people. So there is this very strong idea of we are addressing certain oppressive elements of the colonized society. And finally, the values, the core values, I have listed some of them. And respect, responsibility, humility, and solidarity. So keeping that in our mind, I'm going to propose a methodological framework. And actually, before that, we're going to discuss about this analytical framework, a methodological framework proposed by Ambinathan and Kinsella. This is a really interesting article. I didn't share it with you because we were going to discuss here, and also I thought because we have too many materials to read, so I will just give you some light example reading. Of course, you can find the reference here. They come up with decolonial research methodology under 4 pillars. They present these 4 pillars of decolonizing research methodology. So, and those are listed on screen, and I'm not going to read them out. I'm going to go one by one, actually. And I think it is really interesting for us to have some sort of a framework to talk about decolonizing our research. First is about examining critical reflexive. So decolonizing researchers and scholars, one of the most prominent things is about self-reflection, reflection about our own work, and it is a methodology itself. So we need to re-examine our epistemological assumptions. It's not about whether they are correct or wrong, it is re-examining them. We need to, of course, consider our own positionality in the whole research, who we are and what's our role there, and how we are situating in the community that we are researching. We need to address the power dynamics between the researcher and the researched community. And we need to approach the informant not as a victim, but as a collaborator or participant. So often in the colonized societies, there are oppressed individuals and communities, and we tend to see them as victims, but actually they are experts. That's why they can help us with new information. And of course, avoid Western-centric ways of researching interviews because they could be very mechanical. And when we are talking about examples, you will see other ways of doing the research. Now, I'm going to move into the second one. So after we finish all these things, we'll talk about, questions that we have and also comments you have. So the second pillar of this decolonial methodological framework is reciprocity and respect for self-determination. So there are a lot in that particular pillar, but we try to deconstruct and identify some of the key elements. So reciprocation could happen in a number of different ways, but it should go beyond reporting back. It is not about reporting back to the community what we have found, because it has to be something more than that. And it should not only be about empowering the community. In fact, the decolonial researchers don't like the idea of empowering. I'm sure some of you also have some issues with that particular term. And it is also not about the researchers' altruism that we wanted to help them. It has to be something more than that. So what it could be. If possible, we should be opening up to healing opportunities because we are working with communities who are systemically oppressed under the colonial system. And we need to build our understanding about the anti-colonial approach and also, most importantly, accountability. It has to be beyond mere trust building. Now, it all sounds very motherhood statement, and but I think it is important we just identify these theoretical bases before we go into some of the practical stuff. Active listening should facilitate accountability. So it is not only about data gathering, there has to be some sort of, when we have to be prepared to listen to the things that we don't want to listen. And then once we hear that, there has to be some sense of accountability to respond to that. Consent should be autonomous, of course, but it's also not one-off. It has to be cyclic, it has to be continuing. And it has to be ongoing. The methodologies should drive collaboration. It doesn't have to be one-way gathering of information. So we should look for ways to collaborate with our participants. Under this category, finally, there are two things that we need to balance. One is duty of care to the participants. The other one is their self-determination. They still have to have the right, but have the final say how they want to be participate while we consider duty of care issues. So we are moving into the third area of decolonizing research methods proposed by Thambinnathan and Kinsley. And so now we are looking at embracing the other ways of knowing. So we have to acknowledge that there are a number of other ways of knowing. It is not only about the Western research and knowing method, framework. So when we are looking for collaboration, it has to be meaningful. So it is not only about, okay, you do this and I'm going to do this, or let's work together and come up with this particular, um, uh, you know, story or performance or whatever, but it has to be some sort of meaning. There has to be, the contribution has to be meaningful. And when we don't have access to the community, and also we don't have good connections with the community, we should look for engaging cultural insiders. This can be very tricky. It can't be looking for gatekeepers who have power in the community. It has to be something more than that. They are cultural insiders, and they will find ways for you to get to know the community rather than being simply introduced by a gatekeeper. Um, we should center the community's voices and indigenous epistemological perspectives throughout the entire research. And there has to be a genuine attempt of integrating these epistemological perspectives. And we should adopt the norms and relationship of indigenous communities. And we should contribute to the restructuring of Western ethics. Now, that can be one of the hot topics today. I feel you, I share your sentiments. And yeah, so when it comes to ethics, our Western ethics, ethical frameworks are very much focused on individual integrity, but we have to also think about the collective responsibility to the community. So that is not necessarily being considered in our Western ethical framework. So we have to perhaps challenge at some point. Finally, embodying a transformative praxis. And I think this is something that I really like about this framework, and also I tend to practice this. So when we consciously work as decolonizing researchers, we choose to work with the margins. So we do difficult things rather than looking for the easy things. And we will be looking for ways to talk to the, just to approach more less accessible communities rather than easily accessible communities. So that is a choice that we make. And we make that choice perhaps because we have that social justice consciousness, and we are conscious about the justice. And also we want to give a voice to the community, not necessarily be the speaker, but probably help the community to present their voice. Now that could be burdensome because of number of reasons. When you work with the margin, that is going to take longer time, that is going to take more energy. And what will happen is we have to be prepared for the demanding, the burden of that, and we have to be prepared to compromise some of our, I would say, even research standards or career development. So you ended up actually probably compromising your promotions and things like that, because our work is going to be slower than other work in terms of publications and things like that. When we come up with new methods, we will constantly be challenged by the publishing, the journal editorials and so forth. Now, the other one is adopting scholar activism as an overarching practice. So this I personally very much interested in, because I believe that our work should go beyond high-rated journal articles. And now, so before moving into the next section of our discussion, I just want to specifically mention three things. One is, I think the decolonial research was nurtured by, probably even initiated by feminist researchers a long time ago, and they are the people who actually look for different ways of challenging the establishment and also coming up with new methodologies. So we have to acknowledge their contribution to this particular pedagogy. And secondly, but the other important thing is we should not look for decoloniality as a decoration to our research space. So it has to go beyond a simple decoration. And the third one is often very little research about this. This is about the feudal aspect of the feudality as the other side of decoloniality. So if we want to, so what was before colonization was a feudal system or tribal system. So there were a lot of oppressive elements in those systems as well. Now, when we are moving from when we want to challenge the coloniality, we should be very careful that we will not fall into the feudal systems that was previously part of our life in pre-colonial societies. So we have to progress and move forward rather than falling back to the tribal or oppressive feudal systems. So we have so far discussed I wouldn't say it's a theoretical framework. What we discussed was some sort of concepts and principles to move forward to the next level, which is about analyzing some of the materials that you have read and also analyzing your own materials that you'll be reading later for your research, and then also analyzing hypothetical, just kind of some sort of an act of analyzing your future work and how would somebody would analyze them in terms of decolonial aspects. So that's where we are moving next. But before, so we are moving to the example, 4 pieces that we have shared amongst ourselves. And this is the time for you to comment on the decolonial aspects of these materials that you have read. There is not a lot. There are only few things that we can talk about, but I think still it is important because I think our research will also going to look like that. We won't be completely challenging the entire existing structure and going for something completely new. So we'll be still referring to some of the existing literature of, for example, in these writings, they were referring to Foucault, Butler, and so forth in terms of gender studies. We will be doing the same, but at the same time, we will be parallelly positioning ourselves in decolonial epistemological frameworks. Now, we have some people online as well, I think about 10, and we have here about 6, 7. So before move on to next section of discussing some of the examples, do anyone have any questions or comment to add?
Hi, Visa. I have a question, which is from me, while I'm just waiting for everyone else online to compose their thoughts.
Okay.
I know that we can't burn it all down and start again. You have to do this as a slow process, but I'm just wondering, what can UNSW itself do as an institution to prioritise this different way of working in the ways that you've just outlined, when for all other purposes, the university is set up in the complete opposite way of a decolonial approach, right? The hero single worship researcher, the emphasis on outputs and citations. What would you like to see change in UNSW?
Look, yeah, there are a few things. I'm sure you also have these ideas. I think one is about the whole framework for research funding, because funding drives research, and then the funding mechanisms have various frameworks that limit. One of the things is just there is this restriction on advocacy. You can't do advocacy work with the research funding. So there you are kind of blocking a huge chunk of work that we can do with communities in our research. And I think, yes, so we need to decolonize the funding mechanism and funding system we have in-house university funding system as well as external. So we have to actually put that pressure. Secondly, I think our ethics, institutional ethics review board system, and I think process-wise there are a lot of rigidities. and also conceptually the way that decisions are made and the way that the ethics committees are guided are also very rigid. And it's rather than ethics, these committees act like risk mitigation committees, something like
For the
that.
university itself.
Yeah, yeah,
As to actually the.
exactly. Yeah, that's
Sort of
right.
an HR.
That's right. So sort of. Yeah, I'm glad some other people also think like that. But anyway, I think some universities are better than other universities, but I think and some of our members in the committees are better than the others. But I think that is something we have to really deal with. And I don't think there is a very easy answer for that because we need to work with the communities as well. Particularly when it comes to research, there has to be some sort of an ongoing process of customizing ethics approval system. So we can't use the same system that we use for indigenous communities in a remote location and then try to apply it somewhere else. And I think there was something else I was going to say, now I forgot. Anyway, Aman?
Yeah, I think it's an extension to what you said. You sort of insisted on this idea of collaborative methodology.
Yeah.
I think institutionally for the ethics process, there's a strong insistence on separation of the community and the researcher, like create boundaries from both sides, study the risk and mitigation for the researcher, and then study the risk and mitigation for the community.
Yes.
And it sort of prevents not just the ethics process, but even if you want to use the data or information that one has collected and how you present it, you can't present it in a way as a collaborative methodology. You still have to maintain those boundaries and sort of eventually would affect what they're also looking for, the output. In a way, it would end up affecting the output in itself, is what even the institution, what they are focused on is the output. But by setting up these boundaries, not allowing collaboration, sort of sets boundaries and affects the quality of, not quality, but the objective of the researcher, what they intend to produce.
Yes.
Because we come up with like I'm in the ethics process now, and sort of I have a plan of the questions that I want to address or the areas that I want to address. But post the ethics process, there's an automatic or subconscious slight deviation or movement from what we originally planned. So I think institutionally the ethics process, I think that is something that could be thought about or considered on the side of collaboration and breaking these strong boundaries.
Yes, I think it's a really important point and also an answer to Karen's question. We can actually bring collaboration as an added value criteria for our research. And with collaboration, there will be a lot of other benefits as well coming and also some risks. The other thing I forgot to mention, Karen, is about the impact. Now we are very big on impact and not very big. We started to talk a lot about impact, which is great. And this is a doorway for us to actually argue for more collaborative approach, because impact cannot be generated only by this particular superhero researcher, and there has to be collaboration. And also that would help us to somehow address some of the funding restrictions as well.
Well, I was just thinking about as you were saying that, and actually the whole throughout your presentation about the structure of the PhD as well, and how that really does prioritize still the learn hero researcher in a way through and I think throughout the workshops we've been talking about how to fit these concepts into the PhD. So I wonder what you think. I don't know if you have any thoughts about how the PhD itself, which is often an entry point for research careers, how that could be adjusted to, not that obviously it's not going to affect any of us, but it's interesting in your perspective.
Yeah, look, I think again, I'm not the master. I think one of the most interesting research were done in the arts sector, performance arts. So in fact, you can develop a piece of theater and that could be considered as half of your PhD. or make a film and consider it as half of that. So you can supplement with some text-based materials just to show that this involved a certain work of scholarship. And I think there is a lot to learn from kind of fine arts and performance arts for us. But at the moment, what is happening is we are actually being heavily influenced by real science, physics and chemistry and all sort of things. I think this is the tension we have, and that's the whole funding and ethics sector is dominated by those scholars, and we can't blame them because they wouldn't know otherwise. So we have to actually find a way to take the message across and show this very, very diverse epistemological frameworks. I think probably these discussions has never happened, very, very rarely happens in this in our universities. So that is one of the issues, I think. Yeah.
Can I offer a reflection on the PhD
Yeah.
point? Because I think I've struggled with that as well. But then on the flip side, I think there's also a freedom in the PhD that you almost never get again. And because you haven't got a particular grant that you put in, unless you're working on one of those, but like for a lot of us, you can kind of do things and you haven't got as much oversight of you in that sort of sense. So I think for me, I've found it kind of liberating to be able to explore some of this collaborative stuff, but particularly because I'm doing a part-time PhD, so I have the time, right? If you've only got 3 years, it's a lot harder than if you have 6 years.
Yes, and that is also very interesting, isn't it? So it allows you to build relationship with different stakeholders and communities, and take it slowly. And one of our researchers in one of the example pieces has also mentioned about that, taking time rather than just, we are having a meeting today at 10 o'clock, 10 to 10:45. I'm going to ask some questions. You give me some answers. Goodbye. That's it. And yes, I think it's a blessing for you, but the time that you have. Sorry, where we are. Do we have any questions online?
So far, no. Hoping that those online will bravely put their hand up. We'll see.
Yeah.
I'll jump in if there's any questions online.
Okay, so we can move into our examples. I think that is another way of contributing. Now, to talk about the examples, I'm proposing some sort of an analytical framework. Maybe you can call it decolonizing lens or something. So these are the things that you might be looking for in these pieces. In these pieces, you have 3 writings and 1 film. You would have you've seen one of that or 2 of them, and that's fine. So anybody who wants to comment on that can comment on it. So first of all, we are looking for epistemological disobedience. Have we seen that? Have you seen people writers challenging that, and looking for new ways of thinking and about the knowledge, theory of knowledge? And second one is, do we see indigenous knowledge here? So when I say indigenous, it is not only about the technically defined indigenous people, but also people who have been subject to colonization in Africa and Asia and so forth. Third one we are looking at is, do we see community-based methods or some sort of collaboration in the research approach? And finally, have these writers or authors contributed to the progress of the communities? So these are, not everything is there, but I think, good way to start thinking about some of these materials. So let's move to the article by Ellen Muller, and the picture is about Nachi. This is colonial time photographs, and they were dancers that were hired by the temples and important people, and some of them happened to be men in women's dress, there is a huge history about that, and we don't have time to talk about it. But that word Nachi was referred by this writer. Now, in the fourth last bullet, you see the word was written in Sinhalese language as well. And I thought it is interesting that we just try to see, how things are written in different other languages as well. There's some decolonial method, by the way. So there are there are some interesting things going on in this article. And first of all, the author questions the Western conceptualization of gender and sex through LGBT+. And looking at the Sri Lankan experience and looking at some of the, is using some of the interviews that he has done with the non-heterosexual communities to substantiate the claim that these Western definitions cannot be imported to the Sri Lankan society. So one of the words he uses is about Nachi, and also the Indian terminology, Koti and Panti binary in same-sex act, actually, rather than relationship. And so that's my contribution. So what do you have to say? I mean, applying your lens of the decolonial lens, going back to these 4 items, epistemological disobedience, indigenous knowledge, community-based methods, contribution to the progress. Do you have anything to say about this particular article? Have you read it? Well, if you haven't, then that's fine. No, that's fine. So of course there are too many to read. That, I mean, of course, sometimes nobody hasn't read it. Look, I mean, apart from that, it's a very low level epistemological disobedience, I would say, for the colonial practice. But still, it is something that we should appreciate, because they were basically challenging, not necessarily challenging Foucauldian idea of gender, but still challenging the certain norms developed in the colonized framework. Our Isurani has been quiet.
No, I was actually thinking about this because and I was honestly thinking about this and Frangipani, to be honest. Because when I watched your Frangipani, by the way, guys, Frangipani is just amazing film that I had the honor of watching 10 years ago. And like I think I've told you this in person also, like the most striking thing for me about Frangipani is that it talks about religion and it talks about wisdom. And it's revolved around 3 Sinhalese people in Sri Lanka. And like, as someone whose family is Buddhist, and as someone who is Sinhalese, then like I feel so represented in that movie. And the fact that in Sri Lanka, for context, guys, Sri Lanka, we are still a crime. So you guys are dealing with criminals, 2 of the criminals right here. Buckshot, guys.
So 10-year imprisonment, isn't it? Yes.
And then whenever in Sri Lanka the top like LGBT plus identities, gender diverse identities come up, the only thing that we hear is that this is a Western import, this is something that you see in the West, these are white people things, you guys are doing this and all that. Right? Like, for example, it's so funny for me when I was thinking about this the other day, right? For me, the first lesbian I know is Ellen DeGeneres. Because I didn't have anything to see, like I didn't know anyone like who is brown and whatever. And like how I knew how lesbians do things is through porn, because I didn't have any. And you watch lesbian porn and you are like, oh, these are white women, oh, is this a white woman thing? And it's so confusing, right? So it's one of these arguments that when we talk about this in Sri Lanka, like these are Western import and these are white people thing and whatever. And the more you talk about this, and the more you attach this to our rules, the more you realize that this is not just, white people thing, and this has always been there. Ironically, I have to cite a white person again. If you look at Robert Knox, there's this very British guy who was imprisoned in Sri Lanka, who wrote an account of Sri Lankan history and society and stuff like that. He says that the king had beautiful boys around, attend to him, and it's and you don't. These are the parts of history you don't talk about, and the more you talk about this, the more you feel like this is you. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So let's go into the decolonial aspect, if there is any in the film. Yes. Anyone wants to comment? Yes.
I think it's just an extension of what Isurini said. I think I'll preface my comment saying that I'm not a queer scholarship researcher or any of those things, but even the queer sort of literature that I have read a lot is primarily revolves around how one sort of choice or revolves around one's own feeling, or it's tied around one's sexual attraction or sexual tension in a romantic way with somebody else. But when you come to the South Asian context or the subcontinent, a lot of it does revolve around these two aspects as well when you talk about gender and sexual identities. But also the other thing which we don't see in a lot in literature is around how much of these terminologies or definitions revolves around the idea of family and the idea of the occupation that you're in. In the subcontinent, the idea of a trans person revolves around the occupation they are in. The majority of trans people are either sex workers or sort of selling on the street and other such activities on the street. So a lot of definitions or on this idea of disobedience or resistance that you sort of termed, it revolves, and there's sort of scant literature and scant methodologies on these ideas as to how these terminologies or definitions are constructed, not just on the romantic aspect or sort of a self-identification way, but revolves so much more around the idea of what family would mean for them. And for a lot of them, again, coming back to the trans example, family revolves around just a community of 3 or 4 trans men or women sharing a household, not necessarily building a family with children or with parents and all of those things.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when I was reading Catherine's piece. Yes.
So a lot of these things, like I said, is revolved around what the idea of family is, or the occupation or trade that you are in. So I think that's what I was reminded of when you use the word disobedience.
Yes, look, I think again, if I reflect using the colonial method, I don't think it's hugely, there is hugely, artistically or epistemologically disobedient work in that piece. It's actually is very carefully, wading through the obstructions and very carefully taking the messages through a method of very what you call romanticizing and try to be a bit soapy. You can see that there are songs in that film and so forth. But there are a couple of other things that we can talk later, but we shouldn't be spending too much time on the film itself. So let's move back to Ariratna. All these writers happen to be my friends, and this woman is now in the parliament as well. Yes. Haujali Ariratna. And so has anybody read this particular piece? Yeah. Do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I guess I come from a psychology background and we're very rigorous around methods. So I guess in terms of the first point of epistemological disobedience, I think it was quite confident that they didn't really specify what kind of interview methods they used or anything, and they felt quite comfortable integrating what they learned from the interviews with their own knowledge.
Yeah, so Jessica was referring to the real life test applied by the psychiatrist. determining whether whether this trans man is ready to get the the hormones and so forth, this whole medical decision and the discretions that the medical officers have in terms of defining the identity. And there is a very interesting discussion in this piece about the state's intervention and how the state as an institution defines the gender. And also here again, I wrote something in Sinhalese language. It is Stri Purusha Samajabhavya, the word that was coined to describe gender. And that did not exist before. Now the thing is, so again, we import certain words, which looks like perfectly local and vernacular, but they are not. And when you translate it, it sounds like social status of male/female. It doesn't sound like gender, isn't it? and so we kind of import all these systems and we confine ourselves to the Western epistemologies. So actually, this writer probably is one level above when it comes to the disobedience and the contributing to the progress of the community, perhaps, yes, these challenges that she makes. Anything else? I'm also a bit mindful about the time. We need at least 1 hour to discuss our cases. And if that's so, we'll move into the next one. This is probably my favorite. This was a research based on theatre and theatre-based storytelling. It's a PhD thesis. Unfortunately, it was not published by again a friend of mine who did the research in Sri Lanka, and the research focused on Colombo-based gay men and the various performative aspects. So basically looking at Butler's performativity theory and then gender theory, and then remarkably, really well challenging the epistemological base, I thought. And the word and the way that he's doing that is just bringing the concept of Lajja Bhaya. Again, I wrote it in Sinhala. So Lajja Bhaya refers to shame and fear. Yeah. So anybody read this article? Those who are online? Oh yeah.
I did. I thought it was amazing.
Yes.
I wondered if there's any reason, like, about the context of it not publishing the thesis.
Yeah.
Was it just like a classic PhD thesis not finished thing, or was it some other reason?
No, I think it's got finished and he wouldn't bother writing something. He happened to be my former partner as well. Yes. I know. I know what happened to PhD candidates. Relationships are formed and broken. Anything could happen. So
Very cool.
I think it's really fascinating the way that some of the indigenous knowledge bases were incorporated into the debate, and how Lajja Bhaya idea was used to explain coming out in South Asian societies. It's really interesting.
The mom in the play, the way that they were talking about, there's one part in the play where the mom is dresses her son who's sitting on stage in his underwear, and she dresses him and she's like, oh, it's fine. Your queerness, I'm okay with that, the actual fact of it. But for society, it's the reaction to society. And then she goes on to cry and beat her chest and stuff. And then the whole discourse is did he, they ask people, was that over the top? And they're like, nope,
No.
not at all. That is completely, and she's just having a full,
historical performance
yeah.
about the whole thing, and then so the participants were saying, yes, I have seen an aunt like that.
Yeah, this is part of my experience.
Yeah. Now the thing is, though, it was about probably 7-8 years ago. Well, Sydney University ended up giving him the ethics approval to do this. And, they performed the play, and, you can even see a poster saying, how many, for 300 rupees and 400 rupees per ticket. That was about $2 or $3. So they even, did a ticketed show, which is great. And that sort of approach was appreciated, and not always. Okay, so we discussed about some of the examples, but overall, anybody wants to comment on those examples? And in terms of the decolonial lens, and I go back to our analytical framework. Look, this is just something that I made up for this session, but I'm sure this could be much bigger. And I have another list for you. Don't worry, a longer list later coming up. Anyone wants to comment or add anything about how we know whether this is a good piece that adopt the colonial approach, how we can appreciate those 4 examples that we have presented.
Can I just say one more thing about that article? Okay, or the chapter. I thought it was slightly transgressive, I guess, when he says like he's talking to a participant. He went to like a family celebration with a participant, and the guy was getting paraded around to his family to get marriage proposals. Or like to be like, oh, look at him, he's so eligible, like he's ready to be married, please. Yeah. And then what your time says it says to him on the way home, like, oh, that was really interesting, like I really enjoyed watching that, and like that it's an interesting cultural practice. And the participant really pushes back on him, and I thought you were and it's like, well, it was awful to live, and what, like just like like that's really sucked and for me. And I thought that was really great to publish that and like reflect on that he put that into the chapter. Not that he published the thesis, but that he put it into the chapter. It's like not everybody would put that into their research. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's sort of informed in a way, like pushing back on what you said.
Yes, and that kind of freedom to share the autobiography in a scholarly framework, isn't it? So of course now there is a new category of auto ethnography, but it's always there is pushback from the institutional systems to limit that. We don't see any hands.
We have a great comment online. This is more of a comment, not a question. Lol, for anyone who's ever delivered conference papers. Many times I've struggled to find decolonial methods as both existing frameworks of bracketed Western knowledge and discipline are limiting to the research questions. Being entrenched in Western scholarship and methods of researching doesn't support other epistemological frameworks, and it is so disciplinarily restricted. Of course, structurally different methods are not supported, too much emphasis on measurable impact, etc., etc. I think making space for exploring methods can be encouraged a lot more institutionally and perhaps personally.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it should be.
Yes. Of course, yeah.
That's what we have been always talking about. So one day when you all finish your PhDs and, become members of some sort of an institute, even this institute, and we all should work towards challenging the institution and looking for alternative method of knowledge making. Okay, so we are nearing the end of our session. So actually the session is ended, but I want to, for the benefit of those who are online, just to have a very brief discussion about how we're going to move on to looking at the, what are the tools that we're going to apply in our workshop on site. Of course, the workshop is going to be limited to on site. Now, I have 2 checklists sort of, probably in decolonizing approach checklist shouldn't be the word. But, I hope you would, forgive me for using a checklist, but this is kind of going into really, really practical stuff for the purpose of this workshop. So we have 3 pieces to look into today, and when we are looking into those 3 pieces and help each other, trying to look at other ways of thinking and researching and writing, I propose, in terms of conceptualizing, we ask these questions. They're very basic reflective questions. Why did I choose this topic? Why did I choose this particular community? Should I revisit the research questions? Have I adopted the right research methodology? Have I adopted the right knowledge dissemination methodology? Now, we all ask these questions within the context of the foregoing discussion that we discussed about decolonial methods and frameworks before. These are not general questions, but within that framework, we are asking these questions. Would my work have a transformative impact on the community? If it is not, that's fine, but we ask that question. How to avoid weakening of non-Western epistemologies by overgeneralization or simplifying. So we have this kind of tendency of acknowledging, yes, there is a body of knowledge there, but we just simplify it and, move on. I think it has to be beyond that. How can we care for the community? So we are not talking about necessarily caring for the research participants, but the entire community. I mean, if my finding is going to harm the community, should I publish them or not? That sort of things, I guess we are asking. Do I need to meet the institutional standards? Or there are other inroads to, just to cross those boundaries. And finally, how far can I be critical of existing norms, frameworks, and language? So this is actually probably and should be in the top of the list, but you have seen some of the writers were challenging the existing norms. So in terms of conceptualizing, we're going to ask these questions. Now, in terms of our methodological approach, we have another whole list of questions to ask. Now, if we are conducting decolonial research and we wanted to approach certain communities and certain geographies and want to do that, I propose we think about these questions. Are we going to engage cultural insiders? Sometimes we may not need that. Are we going to reconsider our methodology to bring collaborative co-design, co-authoring of these methods? Are we going to consider microethics beyond institutional ethical course requirements? So I guess the microethics is that when we become insiders of the community or we become so known to the community, there are certain burdens that we will have to carry, and how we're going to deal with those burdens, particularly supporting the communities and individuals on certain circumstances crossing our research boundaries. How are we going to create a non-hierarchical space for us to work? How are we going to facilitate storytelling? Because storytelling is a really big, important part of decolonial research. How are we going to capture multidimensional aspect? So what we do usually capture is verbal response in interviews. Can we consider looking for beyond verbal audio, so we get to know the tone and the rhythm? Can we look for visual method of, visual dimensions of the participants? Can we also look for emotional? So emotions are becoming very important part of, research, decolonial research. So we have to actually acknowledge emotions in our research. Research participants' emotions in our research. And when we go for these innovative methodologies, there is a degree of uncertainty, because we're not going to have certain data. Somebody is going to make a performance for us, give a performance for us, and And then that performance has this uncertainty element. So how are we going to interpret that? How are we going to deal with that uncertainty? While we are researching, is there a way that we can offer a meaningful experience to the participant when they're telling the story and so forth? Is there a way for offering healing benefits? Of course, we have to ensure cultural safety, but at the same time, can we allow some risk taking, because it's their decision. If they want to take risk and they want to put their story out there, can we allow doing that? So these are the questions we're going to ask when we are looking at our project, and that's basically going to be the framework for us for the rest of the afternoon. Do we have any final questions before we go offline?
There's lots of comments, mostly from me, about congratulating you on such a great list of things. We do have one question from can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by healing benefits?
Yeah, so look, I think now I'll give an example for this. And we worked with a group of women who were who experienced sexual violence during the war in Sri Lanka. And we didn't have a psychologist on board in our team. So we had lawyers, theatre artists, and human research scholars. And there were tears, of course, there was distress and all sort of things. But the thing is, what we did was we used theatre as a theatrical storytelling to share their story. So it is not only about gathering data from these women and recording their experiences, because there were a number of other goals ahead of that project. We wanted to develop these guides for medical professionals and things like that who are examining these women who experience sexual violence and so forth. But the point is that activity itself offered healing opportunity, just kind of tell the story and let it out and get somebody to perform it. So what we did was we would never let them to perform their own stories. I mean, I think that's crossing the boundary even they want to do that, I think, because it's very, very sensitive, and we are basically accusing very senior, powerful military figures and politicians about these crimes. But what we did was we had performers who were actually becoming proxies of these storytellers and telling the stories. So you could detach yourself from the experience that you have gone through and see somebody else is telling your story, and then and I think this is one of the example of healing benefits. So I think it's probably extreme example. There could be a number of other ways of doing that, and I'm not sure whether we always have to medicalize the whole idea of healing, because healing has never been medicalized in indigenous communities. But at the same time, we have to keep that question open. But I think there are, healing could be interpreted in a number of different ways. Okay.
Thank you so much for that, Visa. I think on behalf of everyone online, I just want to say thank you so much for such an engaging session. I've learned so much just from this as well. So
I can call myself a master now.
Yes, you absolutely can. We'll even try to put that into your formal title at UNSW. Okay. How's that? On behalf of everyone online, then I'd just like to say thank you, and we'll now remove ourselves from the session so that you can get into the nitty-gritty of the workshopping. And also just a massive shout out to everybody who's put together this session. So Isarini in the room, as well as all the other attendees and presenters. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do you want to go for a break?